Welcome to Outside the Studio. That's the name of this podcast. And this is a platform that I created because I have this love of storytelling. And I also love to hear other people tell me their stories. I think people, what we might assume, the lay people, the people that are not often in spotlights, have such unique, interesting stories. And I like to highlight those. I like to learn about what people are doing in the world and what drives passion and what they like to share. So with that, I have a very special guest today. This is David Benedicktus joining us from his office, which if you're listening on the podcast, it's a cool view. So if you want to see on YouTube, you can watch from there. But in the background, there's the guitar. It looks like a Bob Dylan vinyl cover.
It's a Bob Dylan songbook.
Songbook. Okay, so even better. And then a stack of books, which I can't see what they are, but I'm sure they're really cool. So I think it exemplifies you in who you are and your love of art and music and expressing yourself in that way. And there's so many different ways I could go with this introduction since I've known you for my whole life. You're my father. But what I wanted to bring you on today to talk about in particular is cannabis. And with the recent legislation, particularly in Oregon, decriminalizing a few different drugs, and Oregon and Washington having legalized cannabis for a few years now. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the history of criminalizing these different drugs in the United States and what like our current legislation, how it's evolved to now to decriminalizing some of these drugs. And you have a lot of experience with this in many different ways. I mean, I know recreationally because you and Mom were part of the movement in San Francisco in the 70s, living in Haight-Ashbury. I believe I heard
you outed us.
I believe I heard a story about you growing marijuana in your closet at some point. But also I know that you have a background in nursing, so there's a lot of therapeutic and medicinal background that you can marry into the conversation as well.
Can I interrupt you a second?
Yeah, I was going to say, now please correct me or introduce yourself.
Is this going to be, are we going to have a video on YouTube? So actually, you can be able to see?
Yeah, I'll share it on both platforms.
So okay, because I thought I wasn't wearing what I was going to wear. I didn't realize that. So let me quickly change. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
I was going to wear my CPNW t-shirt.
Oh, yeah. Well, all right. So in addition to being my father, also the co-founder and president of Cannabis Patients Pacific Northwest, CPPNW, which is, again, if you're watching on YouTube, the t-shirt that you were wearing, which is such a nice logo. And I should have put mine on too, but I'll save that for another day. But with all of that said, I would love for you to also introduce yourself. Anything I missed that you would like to say? Tell us about yourself. I mean, I know, so we got to inform everybody else.
Well, thank you for having me on. This is really a treat. I am a mental health nurse, graduate of University of Colorado, and worked 40 years in different settings, community mental health and inpatient psychiatry, and then working on a number of system integration projects, getting different parts of the system to talk with each other and hopefully with better outcomes for patients. And then in the last part of my career, I moved from clinical practice to becoming a victim offender mediation specialist and running a restorative justice program for the local Clark County Juvenile Court for 8 years, and using my mental health and understanding of childhood trauma and childhood development to work with kids in the juvenile court system. But in my retirement, so I retired 10 years ago now. I began, after a few years, I was looking for something to do, and I was talking with a friend of mine who ran the community education program at Clark College. And we were talking, and I was saying, God, I'd be interested in sharing this information about aging in the brain and how to prevent cognitive decline. There's a lot of good research out there. So she said, go for it, put together a class. And this was 2013. And I taught classes on taking control of your health, how to manage stress and pain, navigating the healthcare system, and many, many other classes for the last 7 years. And in that research, I found that there was very, very, very high correlation between inflammatory conditions and Alzheimer's, diabetes, and they were looking like autoimmune diseases or diseases of systemic inflammation, and that there was ways that we could decrease the suffering and mitigate the physical impacts, and even reverse that process through lifestyle changes. So I began teaching classes on that, and as I did that research, I found out that cannabinoids were listed. Cannabis was listed as something that would be a useful tool among anti-inflammatory diet and exercise and stress management, things like that. And out of that, in that discovery, and talking again with the manager of the program, she asked me to create a curriculum, a 5-week, 10-hour curriculum in the community education department at local Clark College here in Vancouver, Washington, on cannabis and your health. What had been the impetus for that request was that the 4-credit programming where you pay tuition had just had a class. I think it was a 3-credit class taught by a master's or PhD level person who had public health background on cannabis in your health. And so she asked me to put together a class like that. And I did that starting in January of 2017, and have taught it twice a year at Clark College since then, up until the COVID came out. And then it's been a little harder to do that on Zoom and stuff. So that was pretty cool to have a class taught at Clark College and have the community supporting that. And what I found out was that there was a heck of a lot of great research out there in emerging science on cannabis for a number of healthcare issues, or even prevention wellness, and that there was so much need and so many different issues and ways that the plant could be useful to people, that just 10 hours wasn't enough for people to understand it. And they were asking for an opportunity to check in regularly outside of the class setting. And out of that, we started a support group meeting in a local advocate's living room for a couple of years. And
that was kind of the seed of what we are now, right? Cannabis Patients
Pacific Northwest, which just became a nonprofit in the state of Washington in October. And we have the website up, get volunteer help. We have a 4-member board, and 4 officers and a 3-member board. And it's just a wonderful labor of love to be able to share this information with people. As a as a mental health nurse, I did a little oncology cancer nursing for about a year in the early 80s. I was always talking with people about the risk benefits of my role as a nurse is to educate people about the risk benefit and side effects of the medications they were taking. The doctor would prescribe it, they would say something about it, and then the nurses are the ones that usually educate people about it long term and where to get resources and such. So, yeah. And I'd taken some classes in of course, in pharmacology, University of Colorado, but then follow-up classes in psychiatric medications, which have a whole list of side effects and adverse reactions to it that people need to be aware of.
Right. And so, those are like your SSRIs, your, were they using those back then? Was it stuff like Zoloft and Prozac and Lexapro?
Well, back in the day, it was things called tricyclic.
Those are they serotonin? What kind of brain chemical are you working with there?
Well, they didn't really know. They thought it was dopamine or serotonin, and we still don't really know. There's it's hypothesized that it works on the serotonin and dopamine receptors to increase mood, although there's some literature out more recently that it doesn't affect the serotonin pathways. But all that's to say that when you look at a risk-benefit profile of any medication, taking it long-term, you always have to look for alternatives and prevention. And so, for example, exercise and anti-inflammatory diet and good relationships, stress management is one of the best treatment for depression, right? Yeah. And if you need it, then you can add other botanical or pharmaceutical interventions. Things like St. John's wort and SAMe or botanical preparations that help with mild depression. People have been aware of that for years. And it turns out that cannabis is the botanical term. Marijuana is a slang term that was adopted in the 20s and 30s.
So it's like a synonym of cannabis, kind of like you would say weed or pot. Marijuana is?
Weed, or what's a slang term that came from the best I can understand it, that prior to the 1920s and 30s, when there was a large migration of Hispanic, Latinx, Mexican immigrants after their civil war down there and their unrest and upheaval, they came across the border of the United States, and at that particular time, they were bringing with them a smokable product. But up until that time, we had cannabis elixirs in our pharmacopoeia since the mid 1800s, and doctors would prescribe it. And in my classes, I would show pictures of bottles. It says cannabis sativa elixir, and it has so much percentage, and it's got alcohol in it, and this and that. But that was part of what people prescribed.
What were they? Was that for depression as well, or what were they prescribing?
Oh, that was for all sorts of things, mostly for pain and stomach upset, probably. But also probably for anxiety. And they were just shooting. They were just using stuff that they knew worked, and they used for herbal pharmacopoeias. And we hadn't synthesized a lot of drugs into single compounds until the 1940s and 50s. Sulfa drugs and stuff. So
when did it became criminalized in the United States, or maybe I don't know about worldwide, but I think the research you've done is focused on the United States, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Back then, around that same time, 40s?
Well, so it's a pretty interesting story. It's a very tragic story, and it contains large doses of xenophobia and systemic racism. So you have people using cannabis products, right? the cannabis tinctures, and they're growing cannabis and they're growing hemp. I mean, this is the United States, going back to Jamestown, and then also in the pre-Revolutionary War days, the colonies, and then afterwards, farmers were required to have at least, I think it was 15% of their crop as hemp cannabis products, because the value in making in seeds, high omega-3 as a food product, making rope, sails, clothing, all of that was pre the cotton explosion. So we had hemp. That's what we used hemp for. And we also, when we had an excess, we also fed it to the animals, which we ate. So there was a lot of cannabis going through the food system, the food chain as well, into the animal system. So that went along, and then there was an explosion of science. You know, there was, let's find out how things work, and they wanted to have more. The American Medical Association was developed in the early 1900s, and they wanted more rigor and scientific investigation of the snake oil, you know, stuff that was being sold on the back of wagons, and does this really work, and kind of thing, and to be able to measure and quantify things, which led to the discovery of antibiotics and vaccines and all those kind of things, which is a wonderful thing. So they began to regulate, but cannabis tinctures were still okay, and doctors were prescribing that up until the late 1930s, actually. What happened was that when the influx of Mexican immigrants came in the southwestern United States, they brought with them a smokable product that was slightly different, that was coming from, the story goes that it came from India to the west coast of Mexico, and people were using that smokable product there, and they brought it with them, and it was maybe a little different potency or something like that, but it was still what tinctures are made out of, is out of the flower and stuff. But there was a big reaction to the influx of those immigrants and their behaviors. And right at that time, prohibition was ending. So the alcohol prohibition was ending. And the fellow named Harry Anslinger, who was part of the prohibition movement, then was tasked for creating a drug enforcement agency to look at other problems in the United States. And cocaine and morphine were being used, so they targeted that, but there weren't a lot of cocaine and morphine users in the United States. So they thought they would add some other in there, and for whatever reason, they targeted what they called marijuana that were brought in by the Mexican immigrants, and then created a campaign against that, along with and then lumped it in with cocaine and heroin.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So it really is tied to the racism, you know.
The xenophobia. They did this. This had happened before. Also in the early 1910s, there in the 1800s, there was a big immigration of Asian immigrants welcome to build out the railroads and work in the ports and all that stuff. But when we began to have a lot of Asians, immigrants and communities develop, then there was a concern about, well, there's too many Asians here. We only want people from Western Europe. Not Italians. We didn't, but we wanted specific people, right? Yeah, it was kind of interesting. We just kind of switched. So we began targeting the opium use of the Asian immigrants as a way to demonize them and to say, we don't want those people anymore. So we have a history of kind of doing that related to the cultural use of certain drugs. And even though, and so what happened was Anslinger began to campaign through his newly Drug Enforcement Commission, and began saying that he didn't use the word cannabis, he used the word marijuana. So people didn't know that they were talking about their cannabis elixirs and tinctures that they really wanted and they liked. And the marijuana was really the same thing, but just in a different form, slightly different, because it was extracted from the flower
and not smoked, right?
It wasn't smoked. It wasn't smoked. Right.
That's, you know, something that you generally put under the tongue and it's absorbed
right
in the body differently.
Right. So very common on the shelves in the health food section of stores to see echinacea tinctures, right, and B12 tinctures and golden seal tinctures and all those things. So that's what we have right now. So imagine you're using that tincture and all of a sudden someone uses a different form of it, but so then all that tincture is wiped out off the shelves, is not there anymore. In addition to that, there's a racist campaign that says that white women that smoke marijuana lose control and they have sex with dark-skinned men. That was a literal campaign.
Really?
Yeah. It was in my classes. I show the slides. There's all these great slides.
Well, that's something that I'd like to share in our show notes too. If you'd be willing to share those slides with me, I can add them.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
As a link that people can access.
Yeah, I can put some of those up. They're pretty dramatic. And then, of course, there was the movie Reefer Madness that came out. I actually saw that in high school when we had went to school, John Marshall High School in Los Angeles in the 60s. I graduated in 67. I think it was like 65 or 66. They showed these anti-drug movies. And Reefer Madness was one of them, with this woman smoking a joint and then dancing around hysterically, collapsing, and this other guy running around crazy and stuff like that.
I'm laughing because I think about, the effect that it has on me, which sometimes I get a little energized, but for most people, it's like you just want to sit on the couch and relax and maybe eat some food.
Yeah,
that's a lot of food.
It's interesting. When I interviewed in my classes, I would then bring in people in the community who have some knowledge about cannabis, the laws, or growing it, or dispensary owners, or producers, attorneys, and even the mayor of Bonneville, Washington, who opened the only and first, and for I don't think there's been another one since then, municipal cannabis store that was owned by the city of Bonneville. So all the money went to them and didn't go to the state. It went to them. Still up there. No, actually, it moved up into the next town up. I'm blocking on that name, Stevenson. Mm-hmm. So, but it supported schools and law enforcement. Those tax monies did that. And he told a story in class about a sheriff, deputy sheriff that came to the hearings that when they were thinking about locating the store up in Bonneville. And the deputy sheriff took him aside afterwards, or he was just standing there. And then I think he did make this a public statement, but it might have been an aside. Anyway, it's a great story. And he said, well, I go out on call after call after call, and all the calls that involve violence or alcohol. Mm. Cannabis users, people use marijuana to sit on the couch and watch TV and relax and aren't involved in too much violence and stuff like that. So he was making that distinction. Yeah. And that's also borne out in the literature. So going back to the law and order piece, what they did was then they created a marijuana tax, so it became prohibitive for people to buy it and for physicians to prescribe it. There was pushback from the American Medical Association at the time in the 30s all the way in the 40s. But then they made it illegal through that tax. If you weren't paying that tax, then you couldn't have it. And that eventually evolved into the the drug wars into the late 1960s and 70s, and Nixon making it a Schedule I drug and declaring it a menace to society, as it were. So, but before he did that, he commissioned an investigative body called the Schaefer Commission, run by a very conservative governor named Schaefer, who he thought would give him the outcome he wanted on that. So they had, different experts looking all over the country. What does it do? And they had scientists talking about it, and what are the effects on societal norms and the culture and crime, and the outcome of that was that there wasn't any public issue. It was a public health issue, but it didn't need to be addressed. For some people, it was a public health issue in terms of some effects, but it wasn't large enough to be addressed with laws. Law and order approach, and that it wasn't that big of an issue. And this is actually on the Nixon tapes, and Eric Lehman, who's one of his assistants, confirmed this in his diaries in the 90s. They said, well, okay, we're still going to make it illegal, and we're going to focus on this because only the hippies, Jewish psychiatrists, and the blacks are into it, so we can target them and make it look like it's a drug issue when we're really going after those groups. Sound familiar? It's kind of disenfranchisement of the Black Americans, so which continues to this day in different ways. So that Nixon did that, Schedule I drug. Reagan doubled down on it, and so did Democrat. And then there was this propaganda machine that rose up around that focused on punitive sanctions, arrest, and incarceration, rather than looking at it as anybody that overused it or had addiction problems with drugs, cannabis, to have public health monies available to help those people.
Like you would with an addiction to alcohol or gambling
or nicotine or
anything you can get addicted
to. Right. Food, there were food addictions. So actually Nixon did have a little bit of money for public health in there, but that went away in the subsequent years. And then out of the HIV epidemic, compassion, what had been discovered in the 60s was that there was actually a neurological receptor pathways throughout the body for which cannabis attached to, and it had some benefits.
And now is this where the term endocannabinoid comes from, or cannabinoid? Because this is a receptor that we have in our brain.
Yeah, just like we have receptors for glucose, for adrenaline, for pituitary hormones. We have these neuroreceptors, and we have the endocrine system that releases the hormones, and they go out throughout the body. And some people have deficiencies in certain hormones. Thyroid hormones, very common. People have to take supplements. Vitamin D. People live in the Pacific Northwest. Need extra vitamin D, right? So, and it turns out that it was discovered in the 90s that we have an indwelling cannabis system, cannabinoid system. We produce a neurotransmitter called anandamide, and that is one of the primary homeostatic regulators of the body. Homeostasis means regulating between hyperarousal and depression. You want to stay in the middle ground and not have big swings in your physiology or your mood. And it turns out that people are used to this term runner's high, and releasing endorphins and enkephalins. Those are called the analogs of opiates that are produced by the body. The endorphins, they're called endorphins, right? Well, and we thought that was one that helped down-regulate people. Well, it turns out to be the endocannabinoid system that does that. Who knew?
Now that makes a lot of sense as to the way that you feel when you're smoking, ingesting, whatever. But
Yeah.
also something I'm curious about, because I feel like as I encounter people that aren't as familiar with cannabis or smoking or the side effects or how it affects you, there's now on the scene a lot of talk about CBD versus THC. And then within the THC category, you have the sativa and the indica.
Uh-huh.
That, and maybe there's more than that, but these are all different terms of cannabis classes that have kind of a different effect on your body when you ingest them. And my understanding of CBD, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you know a lot more about this, but the CBD has it's zero psychotropic effect, so you don't get that head high. But the idea behind the CBD is to relax the body, kind of like you would get the relaxation or pain relief from a Tylenol or an anti-inflammatory.
So I just wanted to go back and tag one thing about the legal history, and then we can go to this one.
Yeah,
the
sure.
HIV epidemic, people found that a lot of the GI upset, a lot of the aches and pains and stuff like that could be treated with cannabis products, smokable tinctures, smokable products, inhaling it, or tinctures, or eating it. So under the compassionate use criteria, they began to be able to grow it for HIV patients. And that eventually expanded throughout the 90s to include medical patients, other medical patients who had rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, or were paralyzed and were on a bunch of other medications. Cancer was a great treatment for nausea and vomiting and cancer. So fast forwarding the question, your question is, we then discovered that there were 144 different compounds in cannabis itself, not just THC and CBD, but a whole range of others that we're still just beginning to find out what they all do and what combinations they may be useful for acute and chronic conditions that we have. Really exciting stuff coming out here. So going back to your comment about psychoactive, and what I was just reading a new book that dropped by Bonnie Goldstein. She's a pediatric emergency room physician who left emergency room medicine and started to practice helping pediatric clients and their family members use cannabis products instead of huge amounts of polypharmacy that were in some cases drastically reducing the quality of life of children who had chronic epilepsy conditions, brain tumors, other cancers, and other conditions of childhood. So she's dedicated her life to that, and her new book is Cannabis is Medicine, Bonnie Goldstein. She's out in California. She just recently, because she's just such a champion and a physician and working within the system, they in Cedars-Sinai pediatric unit now, they prescribe and allow to be prescribed cannabis medications in the hospital along with other pharmaceuticals that they're giving to pediatric patients. That's stunning stuff. So psychoactivity versus intoxication is one of the things that Bonnie discusses and other people discuss in their books. So psychoactive means that it has an impact on your brain, but it's not necessarily intoxicating. It's not intoxicating. And you can take THC and CBD together and it can be psychoactive, but not intoxicating. It depends on the ratio of those compounds. CBD is psychoactive and even in really high doses, not intoxicating. THC can be intoxicating, but if it's in a ratio where there's higher amounts of CBD blocks the intoxicating effects of THC in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part, and then there, but wait, there's more.
Okay.
I just mentioned 144 different phytocannabinoids,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also terpenes, which are the scents of the cannabis flower that are different depending on the cultivar, the smell of it.
So terpenes are the smell of the
Smell
flower.
of it. And terpenes are present in all plants, and they attract or repel insects. So if you want to, the plant will produce a terpene that will bring in bees, for example,
Right.
but will repel some other pests that they don't want there.
Yeah.
So this is the wisdom of plant evolution, right? They developed these strategies. And human beings 10,000 years ago, watching the animals, what they were eating and stuff like that, figured out that this plant that was growing wild in Afghanistan, that region, had some pretty useful effects, pretty interesting. And so we kept, whenever we went, we kept taking that plant with us and planting seeds. And in different places, the plant developed, depending on the environment the plant was planted in, it developed different cultivars, different expressions. So the term strain or indica or sativa is not accurate in that way. All the cannabis plants are sativa. And there's three types underneath that. There's a THC dominant, which is type 1, a THC CBD 1-to-1 variety, which is type 2, then a type 3, which is a hemp-derived, primarily CBD dominant with low THC content.
Mm.
So there's that. So that's the awareness that we have now, and they're investigating it. And the Israelis and the Czech Republic and Germany and Spain, Canada, they've been doing a lot of research that we've been unable to do in the United States because of our prohibition and Schedule 1 categorization of cannabis. But there's a whole horror story around that. But in those countries, especially in Israel, they have state funding to research centers for the last 30 years to do specific research on different combinations of CBD to THC and the additions of certain types of terpenes. There are hundreds of terpenes, thousands of terpenes in the world, but in cannabis, there are terpenes that are very high concentration in cultivars and ones that are very low. And you can manipulate that genetically and through hybridization to express more of a certain type of terpene or more of a certain phytocannabinoid other than THC and CBD. There's CBG and CBDA, THCA, CBN, CBDV. So there's all these different cannabinoids, and it turns out that combining them together, you get very different effects.
Mm-hmm.
And in the initial preclinical trial research in Israel, they've identified 9 different cancers that can be treated with different variations and ratios of cannabis, minor cannabinoids, and terpene profiles.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it is. And so it makes me, I had a specific question from the audience that this is bringing up for me, because I feel like there's people who can take CBD medicinally and it's really helpful for them right away. Maybe it's the brain chemistry or body chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some people that seem to be a little bit like, it doesn't affect them as much, or even maybe the ratio is wrong, just like you would experiment with a drug class, if you were being prescribed an SSRI for depression or anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So can I ask you the specific question? I'm curious what you have to say about this.
Sure. Yeah, sure. We can, and then I can link back to the research and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm sure, there's tons of stuff out there to read about it. But so this is a specific question, and I'm just going to read it to you. So this person says, I've tried CBD for pain relief and was disappointed, feeling no improvement. I tried several types, ratios, THC, CBD, etc. And so what he's saying is he went to cannabis shop, bought some of these things, and then I believe these were topical things that he was trying, took them to his massage therapist and had his massage therapist apply these ratios, CBD, THC blends during massage. He still said he felt nothing. So his question is, what's a reasonable expectation? And he's feeling skeptical at this point, but he wants to avoid contempt prior to further investigation.
Yeah, keep an open mind, right? So continue to explore. So the endocannabinoid system is all mammals have an endocannabinoid system, all mammals.
Mm-hmm.
So we kept that through millions of years of evolution because it provides homeostatic regulation. So just to go into a little bit more, the neurotransmitter that's produced by the endocannabinoid system, anandamide, stays in the system for a very short period of time. Mm. It's reabsorbed pretty quickly. Mm. There's a lot of other hormones that do that as well.
So can I ask just a quick clarifying question on that?
Yeah.
Is that kind of like the person that goes to the dentist and, they have a quick metabolism, so they metabolize through that numbness pretty quickly? Like the pain relief might be there, but they don't notice it because it's there and gone so quickly. Does that make sense?
To some extent, it's like that. The terms that are used are endocannabinoid tone. What's the tone of your endocannabinoid system? Mm. How responsive is it? So there's this idea. So if you think about endocannabinoid tone, and that everybody's endocannabinoid system is slightly different depending on the genetics they're born with, the interuterine environment in the mother's womb, any stress that they had in there that changes the expression of the hormones and the neurological function. And then in the first 5 years, but there's other key developmental times for brain development. And brain development is also about control of the different regulatory systems in the body, right? Mm-hmm. So all those things affect the tone of a thyroid system or a glucocorticosteroid system and how you metabolize different drugs. And so some people, it's been postulated now that much of what we're seeing from people is an endocannabinoid deficiency, just like you would have a thyroid deficiency or you wouldn't produce enough adrenaline, you have an adrenal cortical deficiency, or you have a deficiency in insulin in people who have type 1 diabetes, right? Mm-hmm. Those kind of things. So these are all variations of the human physiology. And endocannabinoid deficiency seems to be something that produces inflammatory states and chronic diseases. Mm. And just like you were talking about in terms of the antidepressant profiles or other medications, some people respond to certain medications, and other people have very little effect or have huge side effects.
Right.
From, for example, from the antipsychotic, the antidepressants, since we were talking about that, some people, and then there's, when we're talking about antidepressants, they would say, well, it takes 2 weeks to build up a level, right, in your system in order to feel the effects of it. So people are familiar with that idea. It takes a while to prime the system to reach a therapeutic level. And there's different therapeutic levels for different conditions and different people's physiological responses to a given drug. So that's kind of the background there. That's the lens we would look at taking cannabis products as well. So in terms of your question with your the question from the community about topical massage products, it depends on what is in the product.
Yeah.
Right. So the ratio of THC to CBD, whether there's a high enough CBD, what the transport medium is, that's a big thing, how deep it goes into the body.
Okay, so and you mean like the base that it's in? Is it a
Yes,
coconut oil
exactly,
base?
right.
Is it
So
castor oil?
yeah.
Okay.
But that is less, so if it's paired with a terpene that like lavender or something like that, or a citrus terpene, or something that has a little bit more penetrating ability, then you would get maybe a deeper effect. Don't know. But those are the things you would look at in terms of the topical. And I found some products that work pretty good for me, but it was an experimentation over time, going to different vendors, different products, and looking for the particular profile.
And you you had a knee surgery, which you basically,
Oh yeah, my knee replacement. Yeah.
Pain medication was a combination of medicating with cannabis.
Yeah, they gave me 80 Oxycontin right after the hospital. Woohoo, boy! Those things will get you addicted in 3 days, 4 days.
Yeah.
That was it. I had to wean myself off of it, even though I was taking much less, because I was also using a cannabis tincture. So, going back to the components of cannabis, it's the combination of the CBD, THC ratios, but also the terpenes. The terpenes that have high anti-inflammatory process and sedative effects are ones that would address pain. And so there's beta-caryophyllene is an anti-inflammatory terpene. Myrcene is a terpene that helps with sedation. If you want a little bit more energy, the citrusy terpenes, limonene, and are ones that are more energizing. Linalool, like lavender, is more sedating. These are all terpene profiles that can be mixed and matched. And one of the things, just turning to one of the purposes of the nonprofit, the Cannabis Patient Pacific Northwest, is to give feedback to the growers and the dispensary owners that medical patients want to have terpene profiles on the labels, because they're becoming informed and want to make informed decisions. So, for example, if you went over to Fred Meyer to the health food section and you said, well, do I need golden seal and echinacea root and vitamin C and all together? Does that help? So you do some research. Does that make any difference? Or just, do I need a pure echinacea root? And how many micrograms of this and that? So people do that kind of research and they get online and try to figure that stuff out. And now we have emerging science and lots and lots of case studies about the effects of different phytocannabinoids and ratios and terpene ratios that are helpful to people. So the person that's using it for massage, there might be a product. So there's products like Icy Hot out there that have kind of a penetrating heat. So maybe a product like that with high THC and CBD that has a penetrating heat would be helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and a follow on to that, I think is helpful to give a little context about what specifically this person is experiencing, is that they say, I'm 65 and have some arthritic issues surfacing that I would like to stop taking NSAIDs for. So
I stopped taking NSAIDs non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Those are the over-the-counter Aleve ibuprofen products, and they have long-term bad side effects and adverse effects. The adverse effects are the bad ones, like kidney failure, heart failure, things like that.
Yeah, and liver
And liver toxicity and eroding of your stomach lining. So yeah, geez, it might be reasonable to look at some alternatives and see what the side effect profile is on cannabis tinctures and products, and replacing those. So I'd use a combination on my knee replacement. So you were talking about my recovery. After I recovered, then I began to experiment with products that I could rub on it before I go walking or something like that, before and after kind of thing. And then I found that daily doses of a particular tincture profile for my system that was full spectrum CBD. So we'll get into that in a minute. And then it has certain terpenes and other phytocannabinoids in it. So I found the one with, the one that was just right, the Goldilocks zone, right? And for me, and then I take that daily. And then at times when there's breakthrough pain or something like that, if my arthritis kicks up, then I might add some other THC product. But the general rule of thumb with pain is it's THC and CBD together that have the greatest impact. CBD by itself can be helpful and take the edge off and create long-term, it can reduce long-term inflammation. So that can be really useful to keep inflammation controlled. But for chronic pain and outbreaks of pain, then combination of THC and CBD is recommended with certain terpene profiles. And I'll put that I have a slide on that you can put up too.
Yeah, having that written down in visual for those visual learners like me will be helpful.
Sure, yeah, it's great that you can put that up there, a link to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of terms, and they're new terms for a lot of us.
Oh my goodness.
Just even understanding the difference between CBD and THC at that higher level, I think there's a lot of confusion out there in the community around that. So I appreciate this platform, Cannabis Patients Pacific Northwest, because it's a nonprofit that's aimed at education and advocacy and normalization of what all of these things are and how we can use them medicinally, and what effect they have on us.
So that was the main goal, was to educate healthcare consumers using informed consent, evidence-based science coming out on how to use it judiciously as an adjunct or maybe even replacing polypharmacy, a lot of medications. One of the things about people my age is that they're on 7 or 8 different drugs often by the time they get to be 65.
Right.
Let alone 71 like I am. They're on Aleve and blood pressure medications and probably some for their stomach, and and then they've got constipation issues because of the pain medications they're taking or whatever. So, and who knows what all those, no one knows what all those side effects and interactions are with all those pharmaceutical drugs. So anyway, you can tamp that down and sort that out and replace that with a botanical product that has a lower side effect profile and has maybe 20 times the anti-inflammatory effect of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or something like hydrocortisone. That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
So, and then there's the conversation that needs to be, well, what about just CBD? So CBD is not CBD. CBD is actually one component of cannabis, botanical cannabis. It's cannabidiol, and as opposed to THC or CBN, it's just one discrete molecule. But it depends, the effect of it on your body depends on where it's sourced from. So you can have CBD tinctures or products made from hemp or hemp seeds that has very little CBD in it and hardly any phytocannabinoids and no THC, and it's maybe good fiber. I don't know, something might help a little bit, but it don't help you in anything else usually. The the language that's been developed around the interactive effects of all the different phytochemicals and terpenes in the botanical plant is entourage effect, meaning what you with 1 + 1 is more than 2, it's 5. You get an exponential effect, a synergistic effect. So those different combinations of phytocannabinoids and terpenes produce an effect more than just the one molecule itself. So that's something we have to think about. And actually, the drug companies that are trying to synthesize it and take the whole plant and then make it into something that are reproducible synthetic molecules, found that out by just producing CBD without THC or without any terpenes in it. They found out that people didn't have much of an effect from it at all. In fact, it had a higher toxicity level, which is interesting too. So a single molecule CBD product has less physiological benefit for you, and it has a higher side effect and adverse reaction profile, especially on the liver. So there's something also protective about having a bunch of the different phytocannabinoids. In addition to blocking the psychoactive effects of THC, CBD, and different phytocannabinoids can also be protective against overdosing effects or effects on your liver. It seems to block some of those adverse reactions that you get from just taking a single molecule. There's a GW pharmaceutical company based London pharmaceutical company where you cannot get cannabis is not legal yet in the UK, and it's highly regulated for medical purposes. Developed a tincture spray, think of mouse spray, called Sativex. And in the process, and I read all the literature on development of it. First, they started with a single molecule, and then they started, well, we have to add THC. Oh, now we have to have 1-to-1. So they have 1-to-1 THC CBD in this product, but they also added in terpenes. And then in clinical controlled trials, it found out that it helped people with neuropathic pain, peripheral nerve pain, which is a hallmark of a lot of diseases, diabetes especially, MS, people who have different quadriplegic, some have problems with that kind of pain as well. So that was interesting to see that when they were synthesizing it, they had to mimic as much as possible the organic chemistry of the botanical plant. They couldn't produce a single compound. We do need to have a lot of science producing that because it has some incredible potential long-term, as I mentioned, for cancer, for killing cancer cells, stopping growth of cancer. Just in the preliminary investigational stages now, but there have been just phenomenal case studies out there about people who were giving 6 months to live, and they got on the internet and they said, oh, what the hell, I guess I'll try this cannabis stuff, and then they walk in the doctors 3 months later and they said, I'll be darned, it's gone.
I'll be darned,
right. So we don't understand, we're just starting to understand what all that is, and and not everybody has the same effect. Depends on the type of cancer and the cultivar and the ratios of cannabis and THC and terpenes. So you can see the wonderful possibilities there. Again, so so I started collecting these stories in the class because people were patients who had chronic diseases, started coming to classes, and then came to the once a month, last Wednesday of the month, educational talks and support group meeting that we started in our co-founder Jeremy Robbins' living room in Vancouver. And then we were hosted by a local CBD company, American Shaman, over here on Andreessen, just below Fourth Lane, in their lobby once a month. And we'd have 5 to 15 to 20 people there, depending on the topic, and have guest speakers come in, and I would talk and Jeremy would talk. And then after COVID, came. We didn't have that vehicle, so after a few months, we moved it to the last Wednesday of the month, a Zoom presentation, where people can go to our website and then look at the event and then sign up for it, if you're not already on our mailing list.
And I'm going to link to that in the show notes too.
Yeah,
So people
thank
have
you.
access. And this is a free.
It's free.
This is a free community event. Anyone, you don't have to be in Washington or Oregon to join.
No, that's the magic of Zoom. You used to be you could only live in Vancouver or
Right.
Portland and come to the classes or the talks. But now through the magic of the internet and Zoom, we have people from Eastern Washington, Northern Washington, Oregon coming in and talking and asking questions. So it's both a educational talk where I talk about a specific topic. Last month it was cannabis and diabetes. This month it's cannabis and migraine pain. And migraines are thought to be caused by, some migraines are thought to be caused by an endocannabinoid deficiency, not producing enough of the neurotransmitter anandamide, and that creates this anti-inflammatory process. So we're going to do migraines. So the first part of it is the talk, maybe half hour, 45 minutes, and then people responding to it and also sharing their own stories about what's working for them. So it creates a community similar to what people do for any kind of chronic condition. It's a support group for people to be able to talk openly and not be judged, and to learn about what resources are out there. So what dispensaries have what kind of products, for example. There was a guy on from Tri-Cities who was saying, I live in Tri-Cities, and where can I get that you're talking about? So while he was talking, Jeremy got on the dispensary, said, well, they have these products over there, they're the medical products. So why don't you try this for the diabetes stuff. So again, we're not doctors. I was a nurse, and you have to issue a disclaimer, talk about this with your doctor.
Right.
However, many physicians aren't being educated in this.
Yeah.
Just now, in the last couple of years, there have been graduate programs in the Department of Pharmacology in a number of universities, which are starting to teach cannabis pharmacology. And on our website, we have a link to a woman who used to live up in Beaverton. She's a pharmacist who's worked many years with mental health patients and psychiatric making recommendations about psychiatric pharmacology. She just since moved down to Palm Springs, but through the magic of the internet, she's available for consultation over the internet on looking at your medication profile, what pharmaceuticals you're taking, or what chronic disease it is, and what type of cannabis products might be helpful, what ratios and things like that. And then if you come to Cannabis Science, if you come to our website, then we can talk with you about products in particular dispensaries too, locally. So
and connect you to those people that might be able to help you with your
right.
profile.
So we're creating this community to talk about. That's just like people do for epilepsy and speaking. So there are epilepsy groups, pediatric epilepsy group that support parents who use cannabis products for their kids, for example, or autism groups where the autism are medications that are prescribed, leave their kids almost catatonic or unresponsive or breakthrough. And the only thing that works is cannabis products. The only thing that works is cannabis products. It's like a miracle for people.
Yeah. I mean, and think about being such a young person and having to take such strong medicine at such a young age. I mean, over your lifetime, what kind of effect does that have on you? I do want to be mindful of your time.
Okay.
And ask you one final question.
Okay.
And I think before I ask you that, I guess I would just say that there's so much information and so much meat in this conversation. So I think it'd be worthwhile to maybe listen to it again for those listeners out there, to listen to it a couple of times, but also to check out the show notes and resources. Because if you're a visual learner like me, seeing the names of all these different terms that we're talking about, terpenes, cannabinoids, endocannabinoid, THC, CBD, it's helpful to have a visual to go along with that. So we'll be sure to share visuals and resources.
All this is in Bonnie Goldstein's new book, Cannabis is Medicine. There's the what's this one here?
I kind of think of
Cannabis Pharmacy by Michael Bax, and Nisha Whitley's book, Chronic Relief. So there's lots of books out there. You can sit down and look at it, you know, and dig deeper into it, just like you would from researching pharmaceutical medications, like you probably should do, right?
Yeah, probably should know about that.
Probably should know.
What you're putting in your body, you should know about it, I think. I'm an advocate for that. So my question is, if there's one takeaway for the audience, or it doesn't have to be one, maybe one or two takeaways for the audience, from the perspective of, you know, all of the things that you've learned through your life and studied and are passionate about sharing, what would you want somebody to take away from today?
Live long and die short. You don't have to suffer. There's hope out there. There's options available for you. And there's people that are willing to talk about this. And there's a revolution in prevention wellness strategies and lifestyle changes to help with the chronic disease that we, through no fault of our own and eating crappy foods and having too much stress in our life, have developed. So we can reverse those processes, and the judicious use of cannabis products might be something that could be useful adjunct or primary therapy to replace some of the polypharmacy that you might be experiencing. But so check it out, and check out the website. We just launched it a couple months ago, so we're continuing to build it.
It's beautiful, though.
It is very, very beautiful.
We have some
Asha Graft, our website developer, she's got great talent. She got good skill set, but she's also got a great visual eye.
Yeah, she's
really
great.
Pretty. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I probably could have asked you a million more questions. There's other topics I would like to dive into with you on a future podcast, if you would be willing.
Well, we could go, we didn't even talk about post-traumatic stress and cannabis and trauma and all that stuff.
Well, post-traumatic stress just in general.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Everybody's experiencing that right now.
Right? Well, because you have this background that I think is so interesting. I feel like you've lived many different lives in your short 71 years, and done a lot of different things, from working in a prison to being a mediator, to being a nurse in a psychiatric ward and in the hospital, being in the war in the Navy.
Oh, yeah. Vietnam, yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of different perspectives to explore there.
Love to chat again. It's fun.
All right. Well, let's do it.
Okay.
We'll schedule it. Okay. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, or even requests for future podcast topics, please feel free to reach out to me on the social media handles: Facebook at Tessa Marie Tovar, Instagram yogi_Katniss, email address tessa.tovar, that's TOV as in Victor, AR, @icloud.com. I love to hear from my students, and I'm always happy to talk about this kind of thing for you. If you don't listen, I don't do this. And my goal is to spread the word about what yoga means on and off the mat, in particular, spreading the word outside of the studio. Thanks for tuning in, and have a lovely day. Bye.